Lake. Cryptozoology has always been a minor interest of mine. I say minor because it was something I'd only enjoyed casually. A few internet articles here and there, scrolling through a couple of pages on Tumblr blog dedicated to it, maybe watching one of those Bigfoot documentaries. You know, that kind of interest. Nothing serious. Generally, that would be pretty common for most people. Most people, however, do not live in my little town where a supposed cryptid is how many folks here make a living. See, I live in a small town in the UK, more specifically in the northwest of England. It's a tiny place not many people outside of the country have likely heard of, unless they've already been for whatever reason or have an interest in cryptids. My small town is situated by one of the many lakes that dot this part of the country. And as so many bodies of water do, we have our own Loch Ness Monster. So many people claim anyway. I'm sure many of you are skeptical of that as you are any such monster. Who can blame you? I grew up here and didn't buy into that. I found it interesting, but I didn't believe it. Same as I didn't believe those people who claim aliens probed their backsides, or that Bigfoot had destroyed their camp. It was something to read about and enjoy, but not something I believed in. Most of my generation and that of my parents felt the same, but many of my grandparents' era clung to the belief in the monster. They stayed away from the lake, unless they were in decently sized boats or one of the many ferries that travelled the length of the lake to nearby settlements. Not us kids and teens though, especially not in summer. Most of the time, British summers are nothing to brag about. They're pretty warm, but usually cloudy or wet. Sometimes, however, we were blessed with a heat wave. Nothing was better than a dip in the lake during the heat of the day. During the school holidays, the older kids would hang out by the lake well into the evening. The worst that ever happened was that someone would get a cramp while swimming, and we'd have to get them back to shore, or someone would get their foot tangled in some lakeweed and freak out until they realized what it actually was. Nothing sinister, nothing serious, most certainly no lake monster. One particular day during the Easter break, where it was much too cold to spend more than 5 minutes at a time in the lake, I was spending my time climbing the many tall trees that covered the areas around the lakes. Maybe I was a bit old for tree climbing, most likely, but it had always been something I'd enjoyed doing. Something about climbing as high as I could go and settling down on a sturdy branch, just looking over my surroundings, was something I enjoyed. Most of the time, I'd just watch boats going up and down the lake. People going about their business. Cars passing down the country roads. Just typical stuff not worthy of merit. But this day in spring was different. The day itself was like any other, a chilly but sunny day in late March. I'd already taken up my temporary church up an old oak where I'd stay for hours or so before going off to meet friends. From where I was perched I could see two young kids, maybe around 8 or 9, playing down by the shore. They weren't close to the water, just sitting in the grassy area a little ways off the bank. Two girls. I couldn't really see what they were doing beyond the general observation. This was nothing out of the ordinary. What was unusual was the large, dapple grey horse trotting along the shoreline towards them. Horses weren't exactly an unusual sight themselves out in a rural town, but they were usually in the fields or accompanied by a rider. There was no other person in sight, and this horse had no saddle, bridle, or any other sort of riding gear. There are no true wild horses in the United Kingdom, and the only semi-wild horses make their home in the New Forest, somewhere right at the other side of the country. That left the option of it having somehow gotten out of its field. For all it seemed weird to me, in hindsight it wasn't all that unusual. Tourists were always crossing through private land and leaving gates open. Animals were bound to get out on occasion. The kids took immediate notice of the animal, looking up from their chatter and letting out delighted squeals. I could hear even from my spot up in the tree. I watched as they ran up to it, fearless as all children were, oblivious to the fact that if they spooked it, one kick from its front or back legs could shatter their developing bones. I watched the pair gleefully pet the animal. The horse itself didn't seem to mind the attention, which led me to think it was one frequently used for riding, most likely one of the horses rented out to tourists so they could enjoy a ride through the countryside. The horse lowered its head, allowing one of the kids to press a hand to its muzzle. I could hear their delighted laughter as the pair took turns alternating between stroking its flank and head. It was pretty cute, I have to admit. There's always something magic about an unfamiliar animal being content with your presence. With how calm this horse seemed to be, I didn't bat an eye as it lowered itself to the ground. The pair of kids seemed ecstatic about this, climbing onto the animal's back. Not exactly safe or smart, but kids don't really think like that. And I'm sure the horse would have made it very clear it didn't want them clambering all over it if it wanted to. It was a pretty damn big horse. It took me a few moments to realize the children were no longer letting out happy squeals and giggles. They were screaming. I couldn't understand why at first, but as my vision focused more on the horse, I knew. How I hadn't noticed the change, I don't know, but where once it had been dapple grey, it was now black. The kind of black that seemed to absorb all light around it, distorting it. It seemed to be dripping wet. Even from my spot in the tree I could see the tangled mess of its waterlogged mane and tail leaking water onto the ground. Its eyes were the worst of it. I shouldn't have been able to see them clearly from such a distance, but even in the dull spring sun, I could see the glowing from those sickening milky eyes. It threw its head back, rising to its feet with the children still on its back. They were trying to get off, but they couldn't. I don't know how, and I'm sure they didn't know how either, but no matter how much they struggled and screamed, they couldn't get off that horse. It was like they were super glued to it. I couldn't move from my spot, no matter how much my mind screamed at me to jump down to do something. Anything. I'm ashamed to admit fear consumed me. That sweat dripped down my brow as my breathing grew more rapid by the second. My heart was beating so hard and fast it hurt. I have no proper words to describe the primal terror that gripped me. The same terror I imagine gripped our ancestors when confronted by a giant cave bear or an angry mammoth. Though where their fight or flight instincts would kick in, mine didn't. I was simply frozen. Frozen as the beast charging towards the water, screaming children on its back, their cries not silenced until their heads dipped under the water that frothed and bubbled as they struggled beneath the surface. Then nothing. Just an eerie stillness on that spring morning. Not even the birds sang. I think they knew. Animals just know these things. I don't know how long I sat up in that tree just staring out over the water where that horse had vanished into the murk. I don't know what became of those kids, but I know they were never found and that they never will be. It was written off as accidental drowning. Their parents beat themselves up over it as any parent would. Nothing like this had happened in our little community. Kids who grew up around the lake knew how to swim by the time they could walk, pretty much. And they knew to be careful by the lake. It didn't add up, of course, but beyond that no one could explain it. I think the parents cling to the hope that their children simply ran away or were stolen, so that they might one day find them again. I can't blame them for that. I never told anyone what I saw. No one would have believed me anyway, save for a few ancient crones nobody took seriously when they babbled about ghosts and ghouls. It haunts me that I did nothing, simply watched as those innocent children were pulled into a watery grave. I never went into the lake after that, simply telling everyone I didn't like the way the smell of lake water clung to me. I didn't think I'd ever tell this story, but I still live in this town over a decade later, and last night I saw a dapple grey horse stalking along the lakeside. Thank you all for listening. This has been Lake, a story by user lunakinesis on our NoSleep. A link to the full story is in the description, as well as any other posts by that user. I encourage you to check them out. Now we come to the analysis portion of this reading, where, since I don't pre-read these stories, what you just heard was my first reaction whilst reading it. I can give my immediate unbiased thoughts and review. So instantly, I like the vibe this story gives. We leave things quite vague. The name of the place isn't exactly given, so we instantly have a mystery of, does this really exist? Maybe, although unlikely, this is some kind of true story, especially considering the number of places like this there are in the UK. Believe it or not, there are many small towns in the middle of nowhere with a little lake by them, and all of them share their own cryptozoology and lake monster theories. I also felt that the scene was set very well. This person explains that yes, they have dabbled in cryptozoology, but they aren't by any means a fanatic. In some of my other readings, it seems like the person is really into it, which to me is a little suspicious. If you go out with the purpose of looking for Bigfoot, there's more chance of you seeing something that isn't Bigfoot, but your brain telling you what you want to see. As for the monster itself, once again, very subtle, just a horse. We're not even close up to it from the narrator's point of view. The horse abducts two small children. Once again, little kids go missing all the time, so could this be true? It's most likely a story, but it leaves enough ambiguity and questions there to make you think, which I like in a story. The monster seems to be taken from Kelpie folklore, which of course originates in that area of the UK, so once again we're blurring the lines here. A horse-like creature that appears majestic, lures you in, because horses are quite a beautiful creature, quite enticing, and once you make contact, drags you into the water, reveals its true, almost deathly form. Sometimes I've seen it as a skeletal horse with seaweed draped over it. In this case, it seems just to be more of a waterlogged animal. Either way, the concept is quite frightening. You have a majestic, beautiful horse, and then suddenly it becomes this almost disgusting, decaying creature. Quite unpleasant, and I don't blame the children for starting to scream when they couldn't free themselves from its binds. And the person's reaction is somewhat honest and realistic. Of course, if you saw something like this, a lot of us like to think we would intervene, but it's pretty baffling. I mean, when do you see this happening? The most natural response, usually when you have no idea what to do, is just to freeze and stay still. And as a result, those children's disappearance shall remain a mystery, so there's even a dark element to this story, which, as I'm sure you guessed, I like very much. Now, there were a few inaccuracies in the writing, nothing that couldn't be cleaned out by double reading. Maybe this person just wrote this on the fly and uploaded it. Either way, it's not a big deal. It didn't interrupt my reading very much. So overall, very good effort. I'm going to give this story a 4.5 out of 5. Short and sweet, hints of realism, almost perfect. Maybe if the spelling and punctuation was completely accurate, we could give this that perfect 5. But for now, good effort. Let me know your thoughts. Leave a rating in the poll I've provided above. I'd love your opinion on this piece. Like the video if you did, share it with a friend, and of course, if you haven't already, subscribe for more creepy content.